1991 was a great year for video games, let's face it. It was the year that brought us the Commodore CD-TV, Lemmings, Street Fighter 2 Arcade, Sonic the Hedgehog, Super Mario World, Monkey Island 2, and the Amiga 500 Plus. Well, nobody really cared about the CD-TV, but in February 91, the same month that gave us Lemmings, Turrican II hit the shelves. So, let's insert disc 1, engage our autofire, and let's find out why Turrican II is so awesome. You probably won't see Turrican II on any 1991 list of notable releases, and in fact, Amiga Format gave it a somewhat meh review, saying it was too much like the original. They said the gameplay itself hasn't been hugely modified or improved, even though in that same issue they ran an ad that said a sequel that excels the original. Oh, by the way, that's the same issue where they actually reviewed Lemmings, which got a well-deserved 92%. Turrican II is a game that knows exactly what it is. It's a shooter. You've got unlimited ammo, and if it moves, you shoot it. The game is simple, it's nothing too fancy.
No, nothing too fancy.
But what it does well. The gameplay difficulty is actually surprisingly well balanced for an Amiga game of that period. There's no actual difficulty options in the main menu, and that really was par for the course back then. But you won't finish as Turrican II on your first try, but you'll make progress each time you play, and it's satisfying enough to keep pushing you on, and it doesn't punish you so much that you want to stop. If an 8-way scrolling run and gun shooter is too basic for you, then this really isn't the game for you. But at least midway through the game, it actually does turn into a pure shoot 'em up, so they get rid of the run part and it just becomes a shooter at that point, so the game kind of gets even simpler. There is the slight twist that some of these shoot-'em-up levels have a strange scrolling thing to keep you on your toes where they scroll backwards and stuff like that. There's also an underwater section where it's kind of halfway between the shoot-'em-up and the run and gun, where you're actually still the Turrican character, but you're actually kind of flying around and shooting. So there's a lot of world exploration in Turrican, and that is one of the keys to success in the game. There's no real sign saying which way to go. You do get an exit sign every now and again, but that's quite rare. At any point in the game, you can just turn around and backtrack or go find some different stuff, or just go and try and find some goodies in the game. Many of the paths through the level are actually optional, so you're just encouraged to explore around. There's even an optional boss in there that you don't have to fight. The reason for all this exploration is generally, though, to find extra lives, and these are going to be the key to getting you through the entire game. So when you first play the game, you might not try and find all these extra places because you think you don't need to, and then maybe you'll die pretty quick. But the next time you play through, you do a bit more exploring, you find some extra lives, and you get a bit further in the game. So it's kind of like risk-reward. You know, you can go the wrong direction, but maybe you'll get something for it. You can also collect diamonds for continues, so you get enough diamonds, it gives you a continue, but it's generally not much point to it because there's so many extra lives around the level anyway, and a continue means that you restart the whole level. So it's not as good to get the continues as it is to get the lives, so they're the things you're looking for when you're exploring. So you can, at any point in the game, in Turrican II, you can just turn yourself to this rolling shuriken thing, and you can do that as many times as you want. You could do that in Turrican 1 as well, but it was limited how many times you could do it. And when you're in that mode, you're basically invincible, and you can't shoot and you can't jump. So it's quite a powerful mode, but because you can only really move down, it does kind of limit where you can go. So it gets you around quicker and more safely, allows you to kill things easily. But yeah, you do have to be careful as well, because you can just roll straight to your death, like off the bottom of the map. So it's good and it's bad, but you can do that any point in the game, so that's really cool. There's a little bit of an ode to Mario in the game as well. There's a few of the enemies that you can just jump on their heads to kill them. It doesn't happen very often, and it's not that much use, but they've put it in just for a bit of fun, so that's quite cool. The game itself is actually quite long, and a full playthrough, even if you know what you're doing, is probably going to take you about 30 minutes. So it's quite a lot of game there. There's no save games. Every time you pick it up, you have to kind of start from the start again and try and get through the whole thing. So there's a lot of game there to get going, and I don't think you'll finish it on your first go. I certainly didn't. But you can definitely do it. Later on in the game, there's these very Geiger-esque alien-inspired maps, and that's quite a change of pace for the game. They've got dripping acid, there's face huggers, and there's xenomorphs, and some of the traps in the game will actually instantly kill you, which is quite cool. So there's a real change of pace up at that point, so that's really cool. So there's a lot of power-ups littered around, and they're the key to doing well in Turrican. You can't really choose the weapon you're using, but you can pick up the power-up that you see, and it will instantly switch to that weapon, and then you can pick up again to power it up a bit more. So in between that and some of the other things you can pick up, they're your secret for like how you want to play the game and how to get through the level. But essentially, there isn't much choice in terms of like, you don't swap between weapons like you do in Doom or something like that. You just pick up something and then you can use it. And there's a few power-ups that you can press like the spacebar to do, like laser beams. But generally, it's just pick up what you get and use it. There's also lots of secret blocks that you can find that are invisible until you shoot them, and when you shoot them more, they just spew out loads of power-ups. So finding those is a key to like being able to power up your character quickly. So if you saw a static screenshot of Turrican 2, you might think, that looks okay, but when you actually play the game on the Amiga, the speed of the action that's all running at is quite amazing. It's all running at 50 FPS, the correct German frame rate. Most games would run at like half German frame rate of 25 FPS at the time, but the 50 FPS really makes this game shine. There's lots of stuff going on, it's fast, it moves fast, and there's just everything's on the screen, there's everything everywhere all the time, and at that frame rate it just feels great to play. The compromise for this high frame rate really on the Amiga is the fact that they've had to use 16 colour graphics, so it's not the most colourful game in the world, that's why the screenshots won't look so great. But there are some other tricks that they've used to like up the number of on-screen colours. There's copper bars in the background to get some extra colour. Turrican himself is his own separate 16 colour sprite with his own palette. But there certainly is a lack of colour compared to say the later DOS version that came out, or the brand new AGA version that's been done, which basically uses the DOS graphics. So littered through the game, there's some huge arcade-style bosses, and they all look really nice, but they're generally just all bullet sponges. That's how you fight them. There's nothing too fancy.
No, nothing too fancy.
There's also this little graphical intro with a little bit of story that's on the title screen. The story is a bit rubbish really, and it was also present on the C64. The story is mostly nonsense, which is a shame because Amiga Format dedicated about half of their review to like spewing it out again, and none of the things that ever happened there are really ever seen in the game again. The intro cutscene doesn't even really play unless you wait for it. If you actually start the game and hit the button, the game just starts, so I suspect most players actually never saw this intro graphic. But it's cool that it's there. You know, it wasn't really that interesting. I don't think anybody who played the game was that bothered by the story, but the fact that they went to the trouble of doing this intro thing is actually quite cool. So the C64 version had some truly awesome title screen music, and the game itself was mostly devoid of music during gameplay. That all changes on the Amiga version thanks to the awesome Chris Hulsbeck soundtrack. This decorates every part of the game, the title screen, the loading screen, the level loading, it's all got unique sound and music everywhere. The title screen also features this awesome 7-channel music, which is more than the standard 4 that the Amiga can do without doing any software tricks. This is done by a routine that was actually ported from the Atari ST, where 4 of the voices are mixed together and played on one of the channels, and then the other 3 channels are utilised to bring it up to 7, without compromising too much of the quality. Chris Hulsbeck said in a recent interview with Amiga Bill that the title music was actually specifically made to show off the 7-channel voices that they'd got going in that intro music. Each of the levels in the game has different music, and the bosses all have their own themes, and there is of course the Great Bath, which is like an underwater waltz section that plays only while you're underwater in a particular world. The later Aliens-inspired levels have a creepy motion tracker-inspired sound in the whole world. If you press space on the title screen, that allows you to just go to the music menu and you can just listen to all the tunes. So there's Warhead, and that sounds a lot like Doom music 2 years before Doom came out. There's the hypercycle drive that sounds a lot like could be in Terminator. Without the soundtrack, Turrican 2 just isn't Turrican 2. It's just such a huge part of the game and such a huge part of why that game is so awesome. Chris Hulsbeck actually later on also did an orchestral version of the soundtrack, which is pretty amazing. So there it is, Turrican 2, an awesome game. An honourable mention must go to the C64 version of this game, which did actually push the C64 right to its limits, the limits that we never thought possible for a computer like that. And it was the original platform for this game. Also worth noting is that Turrican 2 works on just about any Amiga with 0.5 MB chip RAM. You know, the old Amiga 500, I think it works on the Amiga 1000, the original Amiga, and it ships just on a single floppy disk. So you just pop in the floppy disk and start playing. It was really great. I personally think that Turrican 2 has stood the test of time. It's probably no game of the year, but this game and others in its series have a warm and fuzzy place in the hearts of many players, especially for me on the C64 and the Amiga. So, agree or disagree, let me know in the comments, but these were the reasons I think why Turrican 2 is so awesome.